Good day, brothers and sisters. Melanie Renaud is in the studio, and this is a really cool subject. Poseidon, what do you know about mud floods?
I know they were caused by giants having uncontrollable diarrhea.
Very close, and that's actually one of the theories, and I'll roll with that theory for now. It's definitely not Poseidon's morning routine, the mud flood, but it's there's something I've been looking into the past few years, and it's closely related to history of the world. As we call it alternative history or the actual thing, and there's some evidence of that in the world. But before we get to that, let's talk shop about Montreal. Poseidon, are you from Park X actually?
Yes, I am.
Have you ever thought of Park X as the art gallery, like a Park X itself, not the art gallery in the Park X?
Not really. I've usually thought about it as the meeting area of all the crackheads on the island.
Yeah, but that's the modern art.
That's modern art?
Yeah, that's modern art, isn't it?
I'm a fucking
like if you
artist.
go to LA, like if you've been to Los Angeles, right?
Yes.
What do you see?
A lot of weird people.
And homeless, right? Everywhere.
Yes.
Right? And the Los Angeles is no doubt in everyone's mind is the artsy, place. This is where the Hollywood is, where there's all the art galleries and stuff like this. So I'm telling you, this is a new thing. Well, it's not that new. It's been around for ages, but now it's picking up speed. So Melanie did a tour in Park X, and it's interesting. Tell us about your actually art history first, because I think people need to understand your creative mind, because in your research into the Tartaria mud flood, they need to understand a little bit how you get to it. And so tell us a little bit about your art side of you.
So, well, yeah, it's a big rabbit hole to start getting into, and it took many years for me to get there. Art-wise, I've been really passionate about art for many, many years, by the street art, graffiti, murals, things like that, anything that I would see in the streets while walking around. I see it as little messages that are given by different artists, by different people, for me to see, for everyone to see, basically. And I've been really involved in the graffiti street art scene in Montreal for the past 10 years. I used to volunteer at a gallery called Fresh Paint Gallery, which we have a little link about to see some photos. It used to be like an old apartment, basically, that was converted as an art gallery by the Under Pressure Graffiti Festival. And we would invite artists, local artists and different to do like a whole installations in the different rooms, basically. So it was a great project. I was volunteering with them for many years. Fortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, but maybe one day I'll come back from the ashes. So that got me to meet a lot of artists and to understand a bit more of this whole world and deepen my interest as well in the whole artistic aspect of the city. And then I became a Montreal tour guide. In Montreal, you need to do a course to become a tour guide. So I did my course at the ETHQ. Which is the Tourism and Hotel Institute.
Wait a minute, it's a requirement. So, like, let's say if my family comes from another country and I'm like, ooh, let me go show you the city. I can't because I'm not a certified tourist.
Well, no. I mean, if you were just showing your friends, that would be fine. But you couldn't sell tours, basically, to the general public without having a permit from the city.
Why? Because they need to make sure that the information that you're providing is up to their standard, or is it make sure you give them the right information, whatever that means?
Yeah, exactly, the right information, yeah. I think it's a bit of a mix, also the city always likes to control things and make money whenever they can. Like there's a fee to join every year to be an official guide, basically, to have the permit. I don't know where that came from. There's not many cities in the world where you need to actually do training and like go to school.
How do they enforce that? I'm curious. Like, how do they is there like a tour guide police?
That's the part. I've never really seen it enforced. So it's like, I see a lot of my other tour guides, colleagues that will like notice if someone doesn't have their license or whatever, their permit, because we're supposed to wear it around our neck. But I've never seen or heard of anybody getting a ticket because they didn't have their permit. So I don't think it's super enforced. It's more like frowned upon if you don't have it.
That's just, you gave me just one more thing to do on the weekends. I'm going to do unsanctioned tour guides in Montreal till I see the first enforcer, and then we'll interview him.
Yeah, that'd be funny.
That'll be funny, I know.
Yeah.
So the rabbit hole, actually the tour guides, you do the tour guides of graffiti now, right? What is the significance of that? Like, is that something you passionate about, or is it just something to do? Like, what's the connection there?
Well, I give a lot of tours on like the murals and the graffiti in the city. Well, first of all, because I love it. I'm passionate about it. So I love talking about it. I gave tours about, you know, in the old Montreal, the first year that I became a tour guide, and I still do a little bit. But when I started going down the rabbit hole of Tartaria, I started like feeling like I was lying when I was talking about like the history that we've been taught, right? And that this building was built in 1929 when I clearly know it wasn't. It's impossible with what was around at the time. It just doesn't add up. So now I feel like I don't really want to talk about history anymore, because I know there's a lot of things that are not true about it, and there's a lot of other things that I'd rather be saying, but it's not accepted yet. So I can't really start talking about mud floods during a guided tour. It would be a bit frowned upon again. So now I focus really on art. I love helping people kind of see the beauty in the world, and I see a lot of beauty through the art world that we have everywhere. But even I'll show them like, you know, little stickers or a little installation, and like make them notice, make them open their eyes in a different ways to that, so that they can appreciate more the city that they're living in. Become
more observant in the moment of the little things that make the difference in the city. Like it's not, and I think this is like, to my understanding, when we go see the cities, for me, it's the little things that matter, and they're driven by people. It's not, oh, look at this building, look at this CN Tower, look at this skyscraper, let's go see Niagara Falls, which is pretty impressive in terms of size and, I don't know, the landmark value.
Yep.
But it's the little things that make a difference, right? And it's interesting that you actually open people's eyes to look at this. So maybe in the way that you're doing this kind of thing that... what actually opened your eyes? Like, how do you start? Like I asked my friend Pantelis, and you know, how do you start the rabbit hole? And he's like, well, just talk about Building 7.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Right?
true. 9/11
Like,
is definitely a huge one.
I think 9/11 was my eye opener, like, because I lived through it. I wasn't in New York. I was in Philadelphia at the time, but I was I don't know, I was 20, 21 years old when it happened. So I specifically remember all the details where I was when it happened, and like everything that followed on that. So I think events shortly that happened after that kind of started that journey for me. I'm not saying I wasn't aware or open to that to begin, you know, before,
something else before,
but it really like
concretized everything.
Yeah, and motivated me, like kind of pushed me into the hole. It's like, oh, and now I'm falling. What was it for you?
Definitely 9/11 was out there with the things that made me starting to question, you know, but if I look back, you know, I was always like a big X-Files fan. And so like, you know, the type of show where you're like, I always felt like there was something else, where it's something bigger, something deeper, that it didn't add up like what we were told. And then, yeah, so 9/11 was definitely a big one for me. I got to see a speech by Richard Gage from the Architects and Engineers for Truth of 9/11. When I lived in New Zealand, we have a link.
Is there a link? You can pull that link.
We have a link for those. It's Architects and Engineers for Truth on 9/11. They're basically a big group of architects and engineers that know that doesn't add up. It's not, doesn't make sense. Like, and even like, just by looking at the building, the way that they fall, like Building 7, but also like the other two, like, so there's really showing us a lot of different, like with engineer backgrounds, you know, these are not like random people.
Yeah,
saying,
play
like,
that. Play the Building 7, the video on the left. Play that. Let's see it right now. If you never seen this video, this building, this is Building 7 of World Trade Center. That hasn't been hit by any debris or the plane itself directly.
Nothing at all. And suddenly it's just gonna
look, boop. And they just boom. It looks like a controlled demolition. Look, it start falling from the top.
Yeah.
And then there's
it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. Why would it fall like this?
No building falls like this.
No building falls like this, just from the fire or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. Apparently there was a fire in there.
Well, no, there was a fire. Yeah, there was a fire. There was a fire. They don't deny that. But there's also like videos of them saying pull it, or even saying
people hearing
explosions, things like this. But you saw that just fall on. It doesn't look like. I mean, you can pull up million buildings burning videos on YouTube now. You won't see one falling like this.
Exactly.
Never.
Yeah. And you'll see the buildings burning for like hours and hours and hours, and the structure is still staying like perfectly the same, right? So, and then if you compare it to actual building being demolished, it's exactly the same thing. You're like, okay, well, hold on. Like, there's something that doesn't add up in there. So 9/11 was definitely one of the first like time that I started like rabbit hole and things like that. And then so many different things added on. I lived in New Zealand for a few years, and over there was an evening called Open Your Eyes, where they would show documentaries and different conspiracies. And that was very interesting because it opened my eyes, opened my mind even bigger too. And I'm not saying that I believe everything that I see, but it's just to realize that, hold on, I actually don't know anything, and it's okay. And like to be open to realizing that there's different things that could have been like that there's a lot of lies out there, and that basically there's a whole hidden world, so many secrets that we don't even realize exist. And so thanks to all those documentaries and like talking with different people at those events also opened my mind even deeper.
Was New Zealand a special magical place for you? How did you find New Zealand? How would you describe it in one sentence?
In one sentence. It's a place that really made me grow. Very reconnected me to myself too. I find the energy in New Zealand very, very powerful. I just, moved there with a working holiday visa just on my own, planned to be there for a year, ended up staying almost 5 years. Got my dream job, a travel agent in New Zealand. I was a travel agent in Montreal already before leaving, and I was like, everybody was like, oh, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not going to start looking for a job when I'm here in Montreal, like for a job in New Zealand. I'm going to get there and then figure it out. And I trusted the universe, trusted my guts also. And I got exactly what I wanted.
I actually agree with you. It's a magical place. Actually, when you first get there, like if you're from Northern Hemisphere, you never been to Southern Hemisphere, everything's different. Sun is different, moon is different, stars are different. The Southern Cross, like so Poseidon, that thing on New Zealand flag and Australia flag, it's called Southern Cross. You know what that is?
What? Sorry,
Southern Cross.
Never paid attention to this.
Okay, so there's the Southern Cross is the constellation that you see in the sky, which you don't only see it from the Southern Hemisphere. And it's so weird because obviously you look at the sky everywhere in the world, it's somewhat different, but in South Hemisphere there specifically, it's totally different. Yeah. And it kind of makes you feel eerie, it makes you feel like you're on a different planet actually. And like with the, like you said, with the energies and the people and kind of nature they have there, because it's kind of hot in the summer and the sun is strong, but you always get that cold breeze from the ocean. So you always get that contrast, and people are different because you get the the Maoris and all kinds of different islanders, and then you have the colonizers, and there's like always this kind of contrast of energies in this one little magical space full of volcanoes. I lived there for a year, and I experienced I think the strongest earthquake I've been into was like 9 point something. It was 200, maybe it was 8 point something, but still strong enough. It was maybe 200 kilometers away, but I was on the 10th floor, and I woke up because my bed was hitting the wall, and it like instantly I realized it was an earthquake. And you're supposed to like brace yourself. I didn't. Like I grabbed my clothes and I ran downstairs, and there's a clerk at the front desk. It was a hotel, and I'm like, did you feel it? He looked at me like, did I feel what?
Classic.
And I was the only one. I thought it'll be other people running out. I was the only one, and I stood like for half hour outside, and then I ran back inside. But it's like, I guess, one of those magical things that happen there. You never know. But let's get back to you. So now you discovered so New Zealand kind of opened up more of that.
Yeah, New Zealand allowed me to want to go deeper into so many different things. Also because like, you know, it was only me too. Like I didn't have. It was like I could start over in the sense that like nobody knew me over there. I was really able to reconnect with myself because when I was in Montreal, I felt a bit lost and I felt like I didn't really belong anywhere. But then New Zealand really was a whole other level. It also, I did a lot of different things like on a spiritual side of things, like did a lot of work, self-work basically, and learned a lot about myself. And yeah, everything was kind of very different vibe over there. So it was quite interesting. And I really, really enjoyed it. And like the first time that because I got to fly back to Montreal like almost once a year because I was travel agent, so I could get some good deals, which is always nice. But I remember the first time, like one of the first time that I came back to New Zealand, and it freaked me out that I felt like I was coming home more than when I landed in Montreal. You know, it was a very interesting feeling. So this whole trip was a very, very good for me on many levels. I also discovered, well, the work of David Icke, things like that. Read a lot of different books. Also got to see another very interesting talk by Jack Furco, I think. I forgot his name now. But the Venus Project, basically, which is also another way to look at the future. Because like I always thought, you know, there's just a one way for everything. Like you thought, you know, in school, you got to grow up, get a job, start a family, have a house. And if you don't do that, well, you failed at life.
But that's how we program, right?
Exactly.
It's not just the way to look at it. That's how they want us to look at life. Like this is, you know, like
no power,
but also like you gotta follow this process because this will make you happy. You know, you gotta work hard, do your homework. You gotta put in hours, put in years, and then you go to the next level where you still have to put in hours and years and months, and then you know you gotta pay your dues. You gotta climb the ladder. And then you get married, maybe you get a pension, you know, if we don't use all of your social security, and then you die.
Yeah. So you might retire. You might have a few years where you can enjoy life, right? Like when you retire, you have time to travel. You'll have time to do your stuff. I had the corporate job when I was here in Montreal as a travel agent, as a corporate travel agency. I could have stayed there like forever. I had my career plan, you know. I was already manager after like a supervisor. I mean, after like a year and a half. So like it was going well, you know, I could have stayed there, but I didn't want to be in a call center forever in front of a computer. So I was very happy when I got out of that, went to New Zealand. Then when I came back from New Zealand to Montreal in like December 2012, after almost 5 years, because I felt like it's time to come home. I wanted to travel more like in South America. And I came back and I was like, I don't want to be a travel agent anymore. Like this is way too stressful. I don't want to spend my life in front of a computer stressing and always thinking about work. So I decided to go back to what I liked, working with people. I worked back in a cafe. I've been working in cafes for the past like almost 10 years since I got back. And do things that I like. I stayed in the travel industry by becoming a tour escort, like going with school groups to different destinations, and getting paid to travel, which is like, there you go. I switched it around, you know. So that was a whole experience. And then I did my Montreal course, so I don't have to go everywhere. I can stay here and do what I like, talk about walls and street art and graffiti and
so is that what led to like discovering Tartaria, your tourist job, or I mean the tour guide job, or is it something more? I mean, obviously it's a combination of things.
Yeah.
And another question: do you actually tell the tourists about Tartaria? Do you give them your opinion, or you give the history they want you to tell?
I give the history that I'm supposed to give for now, at least. But I really don't do a lot of tours in that area anymore, in Old Montreal anymore, because I feel like I'm lying to myself and lying to people by saying it. But I also I go more general now, like instead of going more specific about, this happened in this date and this date and this date. And sometimes I'm like, you know, it's a bit special that they were able to build this big building, you know, and people
let's
agree
get straight
that
to the point. Like, I don't know, pull some pictures up and let's get straight to the subject.
I feel like in Montreal, we have the Cour d'Appel that's on Notre Dame Street. That is an incredible building with like huge like columns right in front, massive doors. Like, why do you need a door so big? Like people, like a person is so tiny compared to this door. It makes like,
well, you know what they
no
tell you?
sense.
They tell you like for the cathedrals and monasteries, they used to use those doors to ride through on the horse,
yeah,
right? But then,
going up all the stairs.
I thought it was for furniture.
Oh yeah, right, exactly. That's true. The big, big tables.
That's another one, right?
So, and I mean, like, there's so many details everywhere too. Like those, if we go below, yeah, those are the details that are on the doors. Like, if you look at the architecture from like, well, supposedly the 1850s, so let's say to 1930s, it's so grandiose, it's so massive, and it's like, what happened? Did we just lose all those skills? Like now we just build like
Duplexes.
boring stuff with like no details, no beauty. You know, it's like. That's what happened. Like they really took the beauty out of the world more and more, you know, trying to erase, like, look at this inside. Like it's massive. It's marble everywhere, like so much money. This is just one of the many examples of what we have like in Montreal. Look at that dome. Like it's just so huge, so big. So for what this was courthouse, basically.
How did they build it? Which horse was carrying that big marble thing? You know.
Yeah, where did the marble come from?
Well,
How did they bring all the marble?
And I think like the subject into Tartaria, right? Which is we're gonna explain what Tartaria is in a second. It's opened people's eyes to the fact that it's not just pyramids that we're mysterious about, like who built them and why for what purpose, but those structures are everywhere in the world. Like in a similar way, you see similar pyramidal structures in South America, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia. The Tartarian structures are also around the world.
Everywhere.
So tell me about Tartaria, because it's not actually. This is not a make-believe or conspiracy theory, because there are maps with Tartaria.
Tartaria is on many maps.
On many
exactly.
maps. And I think even Putin, a few years ago, gave a map of Tartaria as a gift to one of the governors or something.
Yeah, and
like
I think I read something about that he wanted to release Tartarian files as well. That because basically Tartaria is one of the many civilizations that used to be around that had a very vast like empire that they built a lot of beautiful buildings.
Vast, like they need to understand. I think the size of it is, I think it went from Europe to Asia to North America. I think it took most of the northern hemisphere, if not all.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that there was more than just Tartaria, you know, like more than one big civilization like this. That basically build beautiful buildings all over the world, like all the churches, you know, like cathedral churches. Again, massive buildings that they can't have just. There's not enough people to justify the how big they were built. Like some cities that have like 9,000 people have insane, beautiful buildings with huge churches. But it's like, why
and the
did you
peasants
need something
live in
so
like
big?
in dirt, and peasants live in dirt on top of it. So there's no like, there's no parallel there. Like the cathedral will be this magnificent building, but people live in
live
dirt.
in poverty and don't have any money to even eat, you know. So it's like that's it. Like that's what this whole rabbit hole I find is so interesting. Is like I don't have at all the answers, and I don't think anybody has the answers of what exactly happened, how this whole old civilization was destroyed either. But that's what I find so beautiful about this, is that it's more and more questions that come around, and then you go deeper, you figure out like, hold on, if we've been lied about this, what about this? What about this? You know, like we keep discovering underground cities all over the world. We have a link on one in Turkey, some massive underground cities that make no real sense.
Which
on
link is
why
that?
to the one on they're in Kyiv in Cappadocia, Turkey. They discovered a city down there that could fit like 20,000 people. That's like a lot of people. Like, you know, there's so many different things that we've been lied to on so many levels.
Poseidon, can you see the link?
I'm sorry, which city?
They're in Kyiv, Cappadocia, underground cities, and that could fit like 20,000 people. So that's just one example of recent discoveries. So that's what I find really interesting. Also, this whole, because archaeologists, they know about this. They know that things are way older than we've been told.
But they fall
But they
into
can't
the same
talk about it. They can't talk about it. They'll lose their job. They'll be discredited. They'll be like considered crazy, you know?
It's just like you would lose your tourist permit. They would lose the credentials.
Oh, yeah,
as
exactly.
a
And like
archaeologist.
be ridiculized by everybody. So like this is in Cappadocia in Turkey. And so they discovered a huge underground city, massive, that goes for like miles and miles. And this is 85 meters deep. Like this is not just under the surface. It's way under. We don't know what's under us, basically. Even here in Montreal, they found like some caves in Saint-Michel or something, like under a whole bunch of like neighborhood where there's huge caves underground, massive caves. What was under, you know, there's tunnels everywhere all over the world. These have like entrances, like they found 600 like different
I think they found
house
I
and,
think they
you
found
know?
stables in the Cappadocia. It wasn't just passes and everything else. It was like pretty much a
people
functioning
lived
city.
exactly. People lived
With
underground
running water and air
super well
vents.
organized.
Yeah.
Like they really, it wasn't like a temporary thing. Like it took them years to set up, and they lived in there for many years. We don't know exactly what happened. Was there something that happened on the surface, so they needed to go under to survive for a few years? You know, there could have been a nuclear explosion many years ago. It's hard to say exactly what's going on, but that's what I found so beautiful about this, is that there's so many questions, and then the more questions you have, the more like there's not necessarily answers, but you have more questions, and then that makes you go even further. Like I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about how maybe everything was more in the air, like floating cities and things like that. And again, it's not that I believe everything that I read or that I see, but it's just, I find it so nice to be able to kind of dream again, to see, you know, different possibilities, different things that could be true, to open your mind like this, to not, to deprogram yourself from everything that you've been taught in history in school by your parents, by society, and to realize that, oh, there is another way, there is other possibility, and to question that. And that I find is it's very powerful. It's very empowering as well, to realize that we are more than just a little slave to society that has to work every day until they retire and, you know, make money, pay taxes and all of that. There's so much more. And if we knew about all this past, well, we wouldn't be okay with the state that things are now today. So that's why they kind of erase also a lot of the history about Tartaria has been pretty much erased from a lot of, well, history books, things like that. There's even documents, CIA documents, that mention how they wanted to just erase that part of history, because if we know that in our past there was such a huge, powerful civilization, then that makes us question, why are we not like this anymore? What happened with things like that? So that it's kind of getting the power back to like be able to question and to realize that there's more.
It's going back to control. We had a show on alien abduction, invasion, UFOs, and disclosure and all that. And the reason why those things are not being disclosed is we perceive them is because of those factors, because then people start to question everything even more so. So it's like a 9/11 type of event. Less information is available to us, more controllable we are in terms of you need to stick to the routine. You need to go to school, you need to go to college, then you need to work and all that stuff. So focus on those things, distractions. And also a perception, right? The way we perceive the world around us is based on secondary sources. We had a McGill professor here that actually specialized in how people, register information via their perception, and all of that comes from secondary sources. We'll learn something from someone from day one. We'll learn something from our parents, either behaviorally or they tell us to do something. Then we'll go to school, we'll watch a YouTube video, we'll watch Alex Sass show. Somebody tells us what it is and how it is, and it's almost really obvious to me. Most of the things that we watch now and information that we received, it removes critical thinking. So if you remove the critical thinking, then you have a more controlled population. And it goes for all levels of society and everywhere in the world. By the way, it's not just like North America, Western world. It's everywhere in the world. So how did we get here? We know there's evidence of nuclear kind of war that happened thousands of years, possibly in India. But now there's also evidence of nuclear war happening a lot sooner, maybe like 200 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are explosions, like craters and isotopes that they isolate that are only associated with nuclear kind of explosions. And it's true, we do know that the Hitler, pre-World War II and during World War II, they were searching the world for hidden technology or forgotten or lost technology, right?
Of course.
And even thinking like there's many different things that were developed, including possibly the things that we see in the air and we consider UFO. That could be things that we discover from that technology that are actually from Earth. And that's why I actually don't like a show Ancient Aliens, because it's like, oh, we can't explain it. Oh, it must be aliens.
It's true. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's like, whoa, what do you mean? We know nothing. But there's plenty of evidence, and I don't know if you have any links in your pictures, but there's plenty of evidence that things like cathedrals and everything else that were built, they may have a different purpose originally, and like even things like religious symbols were not put on top till very recently, later on. And then in the whole thing that those structures, they're so magnificent, but they also, there's something very precise about them in terms of the symmetry and
their healing powers.
But they're also very identical in the way they build throughout the world. They have particular domes, they have particular columns, they have particular windows and patterns and stuff like this. So people think that maybe those things were even possibly power plants, like the pyramids,
cathodes,
and we do live in an electromagnetic universe, and Earth is a big magnet. We as people, we are magnets. That's why like things like 5G technology, anything to do with microwave, really does mess with electromagnetic fields all over the place. People still in denial, about those things, but there's plenty of studies and plenty of information out there to say that. We have a person like Tesla, who also mysteriously, all of his, research mysteriously was obtained by some forces to be three-letter forces. So we live in this kind of world where the information is not visible. What's most fascinating to you about Tartaria and mud flood? Like mud flood, we haven't talked about mud flood specifically, but what is most fascinating to you about this?
It's the first thing that really made sense to me. Like when I started looking into it, it made just so much sense. It was the first time that I was like, oh, well, this explains so much more. Like this makes so much more sense than like, oh, there was a war, there was a big fire that destroyed like 3/4 of the city or a quarter of the city, and to look into this and to be able to see, it's like it changed my eyes completely. And now when I look around and I see older buildings and I see different things, like I see way more than I used to see, and it opened my mind entirely to the possibility that, hold on, there's so much more than I thought. And that's what I find is beautiful. It's like it made me dream again in a way, and excited about like doing more research, finding out, like looking at old photos. Like I see buildings now and I'm like almost salivating because like oh my God, this is so gorgeous, to see the beauty in the little things and to realize like, yeah, our world used to be such a beautiful place, like with so many beautiful power. It was more like run by love versus fear, which is now one of them, fear and control.
Well, let's show some buildings. Like you have some links, right?
Yeah, I do have some links. There's one underwater, we could look at some underwater ruins as well that show that not just underground, but also underwater, showing that there was many more civilization before us that we don't know how they disappeared, but the water raised. And now the water is going down again. So there's cities that are appearing from underwater. There's some cities all over the world. They just found one in Iraq also. So any of those treatings on the underwater section is quite interesting.
I have 2 links from you.
Yeah, either the one 14 cities or Iraq underwater. Those are quite interesting. This is a city. So this is, from from June, so it's very recent. They found this this ancient city in Iraq, for example, that's now submerged again because the water goes up and down. But there's also diving spots all over the world with some underground cities that they found. And so you see, they say it's from the Bronze Age, right? So this is very old stuff, and they already had so much more, because that's the thing where it doesn't add up anymore. When you start looking into it, where they find something in those cities that doesn't go with what we've been told that we should be at that age, and like in that time in that period of time, you know. So it's quite interesting to see more and more things popping up that they can't deny, they can't explain it, and that's what's really nice and really exciting. I think there's a huge community also with like Tartaria, you know. So they found like a whole bunch of things in this industrial complex, like proof that things are super organized, really well run, you know, back in the days when we're supposed to not know much about by at that time, you know.
I think
so it's
was
quite,
it Michael Cremo who brought a couple of books about things that they find like in the coal mines, like
mines are also interesting,
like tools, and you can tell it's this is naturally occurred object. You know, they find screws, something in the layers that hundreds of thousands of years old. You know, like,
which doesn't add up with what we've been told about.
But also,
history.
like, but at the same time, like the dating science that we have to way with date things. We also could be faulty now. We understand that could be all, you know, because last 2 years is an example of how not to trust science when they tell you, oh, this is science. Everything changed in the last 2 years, the approach and how it is. But every time they make a statement like, this is true, now we know for a fact, this is how it's going, this is the best way, this is the only way because this is science. And I think it goes to show specifically, and this is something that's visible and talked about, and everybody's a doctor nowadays, you know, either holistic or otherwise, and everybody has access to it, so that information is floating. And especially in Western civilization, in my experience, people, like a perfect example right now, Ukraine, whatever's going on in Eastern Europe right now. I just watched a video a few days ago. People could not point Ukraine on the map. But everybody will make a statement, put a Ukrainian flag on the social network profile picture, you know, make a comment against Putin or Russia, etc. Well, doesn't matter. Like, I'm not trying to make this political. I think politics is the divide and conquer tool for us also to focus on something other than what actually matters.
That's true. Yep.
So if we focus on things like distraction. So it's very important. That's why this information is not out, is because then we start questioning absolutely everything. We start to understand who's controlling what and why and for what purpose. And I mean, who's controlling what? Like, I mean, obviously, I don't have an answer. I mean, I have some suspicions. I have some theories and ideas, and you know, some people say those are reptilian aliens, shapeshifters. Some people say there's ancient civilizations. Some people say it's fallen angels. You know, like Nephilim and giants. I mean, if you look at the pictures of, like you said, or go visit cathedrals, you'll see the giant steps, and sometimes you see the giant steps being altered, cut out to accommodate to him. There's also a lot of pictures and statues. There's a lot of pictures and statues. I don't know if you have that in your links, but you can research it yourself. If you guys gonna go and just start that journey on Tartaria, mud flood, and giants,
it's a big journey.
It's a big journey. All those things will somehow come up in your search. But there's evidence of like door handles being changed. Like you said, it's not just a giant door, but there's a door handle somewhere in the middle where, like, okay, it's for aesthetic purposes, but then you can clearly see then there's another door, there's a smaller handle cut in afterwards somewhere to accommodate for the smaller, regular size human to open it. But they are sculptures, right, of giant people next to short people. And, you know, they have different ways of explaining it. The whole thing with the Rome, and like why would Russia have a victory arc in Moscow with Roman legionaries?
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's so many things that just don't add up. It makes no sense when you start looking into it. And I think well, you were talking before about like, you know, that when you start questioning, you realize that like you have even more question. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are willing to stay asleep in a way, like to not start questioning, because it's really scary when you start questioning. I remember when I realized what the world was about and what was going on, that I felt like brokenhearted for a while, you know, like, because I had this nice vision of the world and how things were, and it was a very positive image. And then I started realizing that that wasn't totally true. Like, as much as there's a lot of beauty in the world, I'm not denying this, but in the control aspect of things, it's a whole other level. And I really felt like heartbroken, and it was really hard for a while to just realize, like, hold on, I've been lied to my whole life, like on some levels. But now it's turned into something that I feel empowers me to realize that, okay, I'm trying to get out of this matrix that we're like living in, that we've told, you know, and I don't follow the typical path, like, and that's helped me to keep my mind open and to be willing to understand that there's much more than I thought, and that there's still much more for me to discover. Like, I have so many books that I've bought in the past few years about the subject of old civilization and things like that I can't wait to like start really reading and digging deep in them, because all the proofs are actually there already. Like, there's been stuff written about a lot of different things. Also, if you look, what's really interesting, like if you look at novels or science fiction, movies, things like that, they show you a lot of beautiful cities, really interesting history against, like in different movies and things like that, which is showing you a bit of the truth that they're trying to hide. And that's what's also really interesting. Like, why do they call it science fiction? You know, that's also like, is it science, but it's fiction, but it's based on real science? Like, there's just so many, you start questioning so many things, like words and things like that. And that's what I found super interesting as well. There is a city of giant that was discovered in, I put a link, I think, on that one, the city, I don't remember where I put it, but Ethiopia. But there was a city of giants that they discovered also a few years ago. So there's just so many, like, there's so much proof. I think
City of Giants of Ethiopia.
City of Giants, that's right.
There's a link there.
So there's just so many different things, you know, that just don't add up. And that's what I find.
But giants, you have to explain to people. I don't really, like, I'm tall, I'm 7 feet tall, but I don't fall into a category of giants. Like, when we talk about giants, what do you talk about?
I think like 10 feet plus, like probably like that could fit in those huge doors that we saw before, you know, like, so like, that's what they're saying. Now I could rewrite human history, right? But things like new discoveries now is forcing the narrative to change because they can't explain it, right? So they actually have to finally change the way that they're looking at things and make us like question it more. But even you showed this to people and they're like, well, there's no giants. They'll still be in denial, right? Because it's like when you start questioning, when you start asking, you have to ask so many questions about their life, and you have to be ready to know that you don't know. And that's quite a scary thing for a lot of people, you know?
Oh yeah, that's okay.
So yeah, and they found like the Smithsonian, I know also in the States, have like a lot of skeletons of giants that they found all over the States, right? That they're hiding. They're not going to show them to you because, like, how do you explain that there were giants all over the States or all over in different places in the world? You know, it doesn't fit the narrative. But I think that older some civilization were also like way taller buildings, taller human beings. Taller beings, and that could explain a lot about how you got such massive constructions that were done, you know, like if it's way more than the narrative that we're being told, you know, for me, it just makes more sense also.
And for us to perceive, like, I think we are constantly being told, oh, we're the greatest or most advanced civilization according to us. Mm-hmm. Before that, people lived in the huts and caves, hunter-gatherers, and now we find out that there's actually civilizations that, well, you don't have to look far. Like we still can replicate pyramids. Like, and it's not as, it's a magnificent structure and it's a significant structure in the size, but it's not like architecturally in terms of like how pretty it is. Look at all those angles. It's geometrically and architecturally super precise, and it correlates with stars and meridians and whatever else, right?
Yeah, totally.
And it has those things that we cannot replicate now with our most advanced technology that we're supposed to be the most advanced civilization till this day.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people actually think about it. And I think it's in the air and people aware of this, but everybody cares about how they're going to feed their family, how they're going to pay for the gas tank.
Yeah.
You know, how do they, like, those are the questions.
Well, to keep you small, you know, in a way, like to keep you controlled, to keep you, so that this is how like society and governments and whatever, like that's how they control you, by taking away all this beautiful work. Because if we realize that the people before us were way more advanced than we are today, that changes everything. Because then people are going to question like, well, how come we lost that?
But you don't even have to go far, right? Like if we talk about pyramids, it's like so not tangible. We don't know how many thousands of years exactly it was built, but we have like glass structure. So like even like
the
World Fair. Pull up the World Fair.
One,
like,
the great exhibition, London Crystal Palace.
Apparently, like they built those structures within like a year or two with the technology they didn't have. According to our understanding of the history, they didn't have the manufacturing process set up for the glass. Like there was no glass factories. This is
that would have been enough.
It would have been. They had to make all this glass. By hand.
Yeah. And this is the 1851 World Fair in London. World Fairs is a whole other subject that is very fascinating. If you want to start somewhere, that's a very good place to start because it just doesn't add up at all. But this is the Crystal Palace in London, which was supposedly built for the 1851 exhibition. And then they demolished it, and then they rebuilt it, and then there was a fire, and they rebuilt it again. It just makes no sense. This is a huge, massive structure. Look how big this is. And it in 1851. Like, who built this? How did they build it? It just doesn't add up. World fairs are very...
Who paid for it?
Who paid for it too, yeah. Well, apparently a lot of the world fairs were lost a lot of money, which is not surprising. But so many events like this happened all over the world with huge world fairs. Like then there were a lot in the States too.
Chicago World Fair, right? That
Chicago World Fair was a
apparently they
massive
built
one.
it on the swamp.
Yeah, the Columbian.
You can look it up. You can look it up. Pull
we
up
have
the
the next Ling World Fairs in the U.S. is quite a good one.
Yeah, World Fair in U.S. Pull that up.
Because it shows you like the buildings that were built. So there's a theory that those world fairs were actually the kind of last time showing these buildings from the old civilization. And then there's a lot of, because there was, supposedly all those buildings are temporary, and then they destroyed them because it was only for the exhibition. So they got rid of like massive buildings that don't look temporary at all. They look like real huge, impressive buildings. So it just doesn't add up. So if we go down here, you'll see quite a few. So, the New York 1853, 1854, look at those buildings. They were so massive. Buffalo, 1901. And these cities were like supposedly...
And hold on, supposedly the story is those are temporary structures that were built specifically for the fair and then demolished.
Yeah.
Like it makes no sense.
No.
Well, right now we don't have this. We build the convention center, and then that center is just a big rectangular box, and it's ugly, and it stays there forever because it has to justify itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And this beautifully massive building that actually a landmark, the way I observe it.
Yeah. Well, I would just like to address the architectural style from the 1800s to the 1900s was Greek revival in the United States. The Americans took a lot of that's why they had democracy as well. They took that concept from the Greeks. A lot of their architecture, even their military, was inspired by the Greeks. So a lot of their architecture reflects what ancient Greece was. So it looks so if you see that ancient Greece was like a lot of that, but just with a lot more marble, basically.
So is that an official story? Is that something you taught? Is that something you learned?
But you can see it like a lot of the buildings look Greek. The Greek columns, if you just see it, and this is on the internet. It's the architecture style is known as Greek Revival.
Okay, school him. Tell him what you think about it. Because no, that's a narrative that you also hear in your tourist guide course. But what's the theory behind that?
Well, that it could be the same civilization that did supposedly Greece or Rome that actually did these buildings in the States or in Canada for that matter. There's also theories like, because if you look at some of the architectural side of things, there's some of them that, well, if it's like, oh, well, here we built it in the 1600s, but in the States it was done in the 1900s. Well, maybe they're actually way older in the States that we've been told, because like there's a theory also that they added like 1,000 year to our timeline. So there's a lot of different things that, you know,
tell me about that. Actually, I heard a theory because, now we use BC AD, but even changed that apparently now, which I'm not aware of. Oh. But there's when they used to write AD before, they would write I or J, Jesus or Isusi, depending on the language. Yeah. So let's say it was a year 100 AD, they would write I or J 100. And apparently, according to the story, that we didn't have printing presses, so it was all written, the Bible was written by monks and, just sitting in a dungeon writing the scripture.
Rewriting the thing, yeah.
And the timeline would be written with I and J. And supposedly one day somebody either intentionally or unintentionally by mistake, maybe they drank too much wine, instead of I, they wrote one. And so the next monk who was rewriting it
added one also.
Added one too. So like we at least added 1,000 years that way. But and you can actually find scripture. You can find literature that has that in it. This is not a conspiracy in terms of how they used it.
Yeah, you have
those are the actual dates, and also there's dates like discrepancies. And very interesting, actually, going back to like more recent stuff. War of 1812, right? War of 1812 happened everywhere in the world. Like if you type in War of 1812 U.S., War of 1812 France, Russia, there's a war everywhere happening. So there was some kind of global event. But historically, we learned they're isolated events. War of 1812 in U.S., it was one thing. War of 1812 between Russia and France was the other thing. But now you look at it, it was something massive, and they're all associated with fires.
Oh, so many fires.
So many fires. And we also things have like Chicago, Great Fire of Chicago, Great Fire in London. And also supposedly...
Montreal had a few too.
And also supposedly like you have all those pictures which they say like, well, that's because of technology, you don't see any people. But there's plenty of evidence of the fact that like you have this massive structure like a Capitol Hill in Washington that's enormous, and everything around it is empty.
Yeah,
just dirt, nobody, no people.
Maybe one or two, but they look like they're not moving. Like photos like back in the days, like it was like long exposure also, and like people are just not even
blurry.
It's not
because
even blurry,
that would say
nothing.
that actually that would be the excuse. It would be an excuse saying why you don't see people because of the exposure. And also like you will also see the horse and the buggy in this magnificent structure, and you're like, how did we build this if we using which technology are we actually using?
Well, that's it. Like there's a theory saying that like in certain cities, like for example in San Francisco, they had the gold rush, but it wasn't actually like they needed more people to kind of shovel up, like rediscover the city through the mud. Basically, the city was there, but they had to dig to find it. Another theory also, for example, the rail system was also already
Metro
there
as well, right? It was dug out, so like London, for example, or Metro in Moscow that I also looked into.
That looks insane, yeah.
So a lot of those things were dug out, which brings it to a mud flood. I actually was in London a few months ago, and I was walking. I don't have a picture to pull it up now, but I was walking and I was looking at the buildings where the full-blown, floors, like it was like second, let's say a 3-story building, and the 1st-story building will be underground with a trench dug around it to expose the full-size windows, full-size entrances, which makes no sense. Like, and I mean, like, it's literally like 10, 15 feet underground, and you're walking above it, and you look, there's a trench, 10, 15 minutes, and it's not like a small basement windows that we have and duplexes in Montreal. I'm talking about like full-blown access, a full functioning door, big windows. Who would build like that, the structure underground, and then put in all those big windows?
Like, why would you do that?
Why would you do that?
Why would you put a window on the ground level?
And also on top of that, it looks like it's been dug out, and maybe not even the whole building, but just the side of the building. And there's evidence of this stuff everywhere. I mean, you can look it up.
We have a link on mud floods with like a few images, like towards the beginning, where we can see a few images like this where like
look, I believe I don't mean to interrupt. I believe 90% of our history, well, actually it's not I believe, this is a fact, 97% of our history has been lost to time, not on purpose, but just the fact that there's so much happening, you know what I mean, that we can't record everything at the same time.
For sure.
So for sure there's a lot of mysteries that we don't know. Is it on purpose? Maybe some of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would say an argument, if I don't know if it was intentional or not, I still think the information is controlled intentionally.
Yeah, exactly.
For what purpose? That's that another we can just. It's another story. But look at this. Look at this.
This one's wild. This
is crazy,
nuts.
Right? Like how, like you can see that the building, like it continues so much. So that's it. There's a whole theory that we're only seeing the top of the buildings. Like nowadays, that there could be so much more deeper. I'd love to be able to start digging, to try to confirm this. But there's a lot of
try to get a permit for that, right?
Exactly. That wouldn't be very easy either. But these are some of the examples where you can see, like, look, there's windows underground. Like, what is this? Like, how makes no sense,
Well, they call it like the official explanation. It's a culture debris, cultural level, meaning like apparently 200 years ago, 300 years ago, people would throw their rubbish outside. Like they would just sweep the things outside, and with time, eventually the levels of that garbage. That's the official explanation.
No, that's not true.
I don't.
No,
this
that's
is actually no. I know it's not true, but it's an official explanation for some of those buildings. Maybe not this one.
Well, look. In Greece, where the Parthenon is, there's a whole museum, right? And when they were building that museum, it's relatively new. It's in the 2010s, if I'm not mistaken. Like when I went, I think it was like 2 years old. They were digging stuff out, and they found deep beneath the ancient city of Athens, right? And in this city, so what they did was, instead of demolishing it and building the museum, what they did is they built the museum over this old city that they discovered.
Nice.
And then when you walk either through the museum on the lower levels, or when you're walking into the museum, they actually have these giant glass windows that you can see to the bottom. And you can see ancient cities with whole like aqueducts, like pipe systems. You know what I mean? Obviously, pipes what it was to them, not like pipes like we have nowadays. But I think it just disasters happen. Wars happen all the time. Shit crumbles. It all turns into dust, and everything ends up getting covered. But then, as a human, it stays conserved. And then, as humans, you have to rebuild, right? It's obviously the reason why people lived there in the first place is because it was a place that was livable. It wasn't just a random place in the desert. So people are going to rebuild naturally, I think. So yeah,
that's actually a super point you brought up, because this, what you mentioned in Greece, that phenomenon, that specifically, I know what you're saying, there's evidence of something happening, some kind of event, disaster, war. But it's worldwide.
I think because humans always need the same. We always have the same needs at the end of the day. I don't know how to explain this. Like, we need water.
We need water. Food, we need power.
We need power. We need industry and all that to function.
But that's also debatable. Like, do we actually need food? Have we been? Is that another? That's another like rabbit hole, basically. But like,
but that goes too far into like weird stuff.
But why do you say that?
What do you mean?
Why do you what if sky's the limit? What if it's really that what if it is true? Like, what if we don't need food? And actually,
There's breatharians.
okay, so
Documented breatharians that they only breathe.
if we, let's say, if we read Bible, right, and Bible could be a historical account, prophetical, or allegorical, right? But on the historical side, if we read Genesis, and we read things like Noah, right? He built a big boat to save a whole bunch of
Anybody thought he was crazy until the water
but
came.
if you looked at the ages of those people that lived 900, 700,000 years old, I mean, not everybody reads scripture or takes it literally. I'm saying, but there's accounts of that in the Bible. So like there's it could have been, it's the oldest book in the world that as far as I know, could it be also misinterpreted and by the way, this is the craziest thing, Poseidon. The clock used to be not 24 hours, but I think 17. You can still find clocks on towers in different cities. It's very rare, but you can come across a clock that only had 17 hours in it. And the idea is if you manage people's perception of how the time flows, it's also another control tool. Also, there are 13 constellations, but we have 12 months. But if you take 365, you divide it by 13, you get 28 day equal months, and you have this one extra day. I'll give you like September.
September is 7.
Oh, there's the I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the two types of calendars, right?
Gregorian calendar that got introduced also.
Well, we're using the Gregorian right now, no?
Yeah, that's what I mean. So it's another control tool. So let's say if you have 13 months and you let's say well we know for a fact September is 7, October 8, November 9, December 10, right? Deca. And then January 1, February 2, March 3, whatever the names of the March. So March would be the 13th month. And the first month will be April.
Yeah, exactly.
And but then it's 364 divided by 13, you get 28. But then you have this one extra day, which falls on Easter, right? Some kind of revival, right? So there's even conspiracy in that. Why was the calendar changed as well? That's also not. So again, you can look into it. We can talk for those things.
It's called the Ethiopian calendar.
Calendar.
13 months. Yeah, I've researched this in the
but
past.
there are also 13 constellations, right? That associated with 13 months, right? We look at it, but for some reason we're using 12 months now. So it's very interesting, and I don't know. Do you have something to add to this, like in terms of your conspiracy? Because mud flood, like this is really interesting because it's an event that is recorded throughout the whole world. It's not just isolated event, and it happens somewhere within 200 maybe years.
Yeah, we don't know exactly. It's interesting.
It could be also human jealousy, right? So they were so because I've researched the Tartarian. Researched. I've looked into it a bit. Research. I'm talking like I'm a researcher. It could just be human jealousy that they were so great. Their architecture was so beautiful that they were hated by everyone around them. And then once they got destroyed, people were kind of like, no, this didn't exist. Kind of like as to. I don't know how to
book burning, right? That's
there you go. Kind of like these people were better than me, But I don't like this. I know I can never amount to what.
Or it goes back to control tool. Like don't let people know there's something different other, right?
Yeah.
So this is like what world that we actually live in. We live in the world where government cares. We live in the world where we're all. The truth of the matter is we live in a world where there's one thing unites us, and that one thing is discrimination against tall people. And I wish I lived back in Tartarian day because, they had nice doors and big windows and all those buildings were built for me technically. But yeah, so that's why this subject is so dear to me. But 7 feet tall, I bump my head all the time. And, Poseidon, you can relate in some way, right?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit, exactly. He's not a smart
Not as
guy.
much as you. Not as much as you.
Yeah, and you understand, it's like, the building code is not like, what, 6'6", what are the doorways now? 6'8", 6'7", so I gotta, most households. So I got to customize the world. Oh, I got to go back in time and live in Tartaria.
Exactly.
Also, there's evidence of like even pictures and drawings of electricity being implemented like 200 plus years ago.
Many years ago.
Many years ago. I mean, again, you can.
I don't remember which World Fair it was, but one of the World Fair, I don't know if it was Chicago or one of them, like where they had electricity on the site, but there was no electricity, like as much electricity in New York City or something like that at the same time, you know, like things that just, when you start looking at the dates and what the history tells us, or things like the architects who are responsible for having built like dozens of buildings in their short career, and it just, nothing adds up. That's the thing that's kind of interesting, is that when you actually start looking into some things, it doesn't make sense with the narrative with which we've been told. And that's where it gets interesting when you start finding proofs that, okay, hold on, but this doesn't make sense with what we've been told, with what we've learned. That's what I find very interesting. And that's what I think everybody should be opening themselves to. And that the Tartaria community is like so huge. There's people like all around the world, like that are starting to look into this and sharing also. And it's a really beautiful community to see everybody like getting really interested in this whole subject. Like I started my Tartaria Montreal page on Instagram about 1.5 years ago. And it's crazy the amount of accounts that have started appearing about Tartaria worldwide. And it's just like people like me and you that are just going around taking photos of buildings that they're like, hold on, this doesn't fit. Like, why is this like this? Like, this doesn't make sense. And that's what's really interesting, is that we're all taking back a bit, like,
well, just, you
the
know,
control,
we're
you know?
about to wrap it up, but is there a few more pictures that we can show to people about Montreal?
Yeah, of course.
I just want to use one example.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I want to use the example of Troy. For the longest time, we thought it was mythology, the story, like Achilles and all these great stories. But then recently, when was it? The 1900s? That they dug up the city of Troy. It was an archaeologist. I think it was by mistake as well. On top of it, that he dug it up.
It's always a mistake.
Yeah. Then he dug it up and was like, "Oh shit, this might actually be real." And they realized it was the city of Troy and everything. And so, where I'm going with this is that it may seem like myth to us because we have no proof, but then we start uncovering stuff and like, "Oh shit, this might be real." It was just lost to history.
Well, that's why I brought
Totally.
up Bible, like, you know, to some people read it as, you know, some mythological thing, you know, and some people perceive it as the truth and the only truth. And they have a point because of the story you just brought it up, you know.
Yeah.
But do you have
Yeah, if we look, for example, the Seagram building at the end in the links about the Montreal buildings in Montreal. The Seagram building, the Seagram family was a huge family that was very rich here in Montreal. And it's interesting, like they're also linked to alcohol because they would sell, I think it was whiskey, Seagram.
Yeah, in LaSalle, there used to be a big Seagram factory. I smelled it 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they exist anymore. I don't think Seagram was bought out by somebody else.
Yeah, it's not, doesn't exist anymore. But look at this building. Like, look how it looks like a castle. Like if we go down, there's also like, look at that.
This
like,
is very Gothic.
Right?
Yeah.
How old is this building?
It's from the late 1800s, I think, early 1900s. But it looks like a castle like you could find in Europe. You know, it doesn't really fit the narrative of the architecture here in Montreal, now part of McGill University. But look at that kind of griffin, or like, I don't know what that little gargoyle. Yeah, it's just a very, like, there's so many weird things. There's also the face of Robert Burns, who was like a writer. But it's just very
You know what they say,
intriguing.
symbolism will be the end, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's what's quite, this building fascinates me. I find it really
Where is it?
impressive.
What's the
It's on
location?
Peel Street,
On
just
Peel Street.
north of St. Catherine, between St. Catherine and Maisonneuve.
How many times I walked by there and I didn't even
Exactly.
look at
Like,
it.
you know, we don't look up, we don't look like, but that's what also is really nice now that I started my Tartaria account. Like, I always was really into architecture. So I already had like a whole bunch of photos of random buildings. But now I see all those details. I see all the gargoyles that there are on so many churches around in Montreal that I never noticed before. And you're like, wow, like, why is that there? Like, where's the story? Like, how was it built? Like, who built it? Why? You know, it's just, it
to
starts,
answer that question, I think like you and me cannot. So I think the point is start doing your own research and kick in your own critical thinking. And I think together, if we put pieces of information together, the truth will set you free. It will become self-evident. So definitely research mud flood, Tartaria, what else?
Well, civilization, world fairs. World fairs is a very fascinating topic. Yeah. Definitely super interesting. It's such a deep rabbit hole to go down there.
Last question before we finish: is Earth flat?
I think so. I think Earth is flat. I think there's more proofs of Earth being flat than it being round on a planet. That's where we've been told. I think it's a plane, like a flat plane.
But that's a whole different show.
Yeah.
So we'll probably have you back for something we can discuss on flat Earth. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, brothers and sisters, for listening. We'll put all the links underneath for you to get in touch and find her tours. Melanie, your tours are incredible. Thank you for being on the show. Poseidon, any last questions?
Nah.
It's all good. Thank you, brothers and sisters. See you on the next one. Ciao.